New York City, November 2014. A famed restaurant closed for a private event. World-renowned writers dine beside their editors and agents. Among the guests, the big publishers who seek to profit from the books they print. At the National Book Awards, one distinguished author will be honored with a prestigious award. But her speech will speak to a critical tension lingering in the room. What does she have to say? And how does she hope art can spark a change? Find out. Read Freedom by Ursula K. Le Guin.
Freedom. I seldom have as much pleasure in reading nonfiction as I do in a poem or story. I can admire a well-made essay, but I'd rather follow a narrative than a thought. And the more abstract the thought, the less I comprehend it. Philosophy inhabits my mind only as parables, and logic never enters it at all. Yet my grasp of syntax, which seems to me the logic of a language, is excellent. So I imagine that this limitation in my thinking is related to my abysmal mathematical incompetence, my inability to play chess or even checkers, perhaps my incomprehension of key and music. There seems to be a firewall in my mind against ideas expressed in numbers and graphs rather than words or in abstract words such as sin or creativity. I just don't understand, and my incomprehension is boredom. So the nonfiction I read is mostly narrative, biography, history, travel, and science in its descriptive aspect, geology, cosmology, natural history, anthropology, psychology, etc. The more specific, the better. And not only narrativity, but the quality of the writing is of the first importance to me. Rightly or not, I believe a dull, inept style signals poverty or incompleteness of thought. I see the accuracy, scope, and quality of Darwin's intellect directly expressed in the clarity, strength, and vitality of his writing, the beauty of it. This means I've set myself an awfully high standard when it comes to writing nonfiction. And if it isn't narrative, it's going to be hard work and hard for me to judge as good or bad. Writing fiction or poetry is natural to me. I do it, want to do it, am fulfilled in doing it. The way a dancer dances or a tree grows. Story or poem is spun directly out of my entire self, and so I consider myself without question the primary judge of its accuracy, honesty, and quality. Writing talks or essays, however, is always more like doing schoolwork. It's going to be assessed for style and content, but my essays may be judged by people who know a lot more than I do about what I'm talking about. Fortunately, studying French and other Romance literatures, I got good training in scholarship and in writing critical prose, which gave me some confidence. Unfortunately, I also showed a gift for the snow job, not the kind that buries fake facts under the blizzard of statistics, but the stylistic snow job, expressing incomplete ideas with such graceful confidence that they are perfectly convincing until examined. After all, a fluid style isn't altogether dependent on the thoughts it expresses. It can be used to skate over gaps in knowledge and conceal rickety joints between ideas. When I'm writing nonfiction, I have to be very aware of my tendency to let the words take their own course, leading me softly, happily away from fact, away from rigorous connection of ideas toward my native country. Fiction and poetry, where truths are expressed and thoughts connected in an entirely different way. As I got old and my total store of energy began to shrink, I began to travel about to give speeches less often and less far, and was less willing to take on a big talk or essay topic that would eat up weeks or months of research, planning, writing, and rewriting. So there are fewer talks and essays in this book than in my earlier nonfiction collections, and proportionately more book reviews. A book review is usually pretty short, under 1,000 words, and naturally limited in topic. It has certain requirements of description, but allows a lot of leeway as to pronouncing judgment, even though it involves the writer's conscience pretty directly. It is an interesting and demanding form, and one can say a good deal in a review that has to do with wider matters, literary and otherwise. I like writing reviews, except when I dislike the book I'm reviewing. When it comes to reading reviews, of course, the best is one that sends me right to the bookstore. But I also treasure a hatchet job well written and well deserved. The pleasure of reading a killer review of a bad book is guiltless. The pleasure of writing one, however, is darkened for me by all kinds of compunctions. Fellow feeling for the author, shame at enjoying inflicting shame. All the same, so long as I've tried to understand what the author tried to do and have no illusions of my crucial infallibility, condoning inferiority isn't an option to me. For this reason, the only real killer review in this book presented me with an intense problem. I had considerable respect for the author, but thought the book almost incredibly bad. I had no idea how to review it. I appealed to my friend, the novelist, Molly Gloss, what to do. She suggested that I simply tell the plot. It was an excellent solution. Supply enough hint and the problem vanishes. As for what writing an essay or talk demands, the expensive time and energy on research, thinking out, rethinking, this of course varies according to the subject. One of the longer pieces in this book, Living in a Work of Art, was not written as most of them were as a talk to a group or on commission by periodical, though it ended up happily in Paradoxa. It was something I wanted to write, purely on the principle of E.M. Forster's lady who said, "How do I know what I think till I see what I say?" It didn't take very much research, and once it got going, it was a pleasure to write. When I can use prose as I do in writing stories as a direct means or form of thinking, not as a way of saying something I know or believe, not as a vehicle for a message, but as an exploration, a voyage of discovery resulting in something I didn't know before I wrote it, then I feel that I'm using it properly. So that one is probably my favorite of these pieces. I'm often asked to deliver a message and quite capable of doing so, but I seldom find it easy or particularly pleasant. One of the shortest pieces in the book is my speech on receiving the National Book Foundation Medal in 2014. I was informed in June that this honor had been awarded me, so long as I'd come to New York to get it and make an acceptance speech lasting not more than 7 minutes. I accepted with much hesitation. From June until November, I worked on that little talk. I rethought and replanned it, anxiously, over and over. Even on a poem, I've never worked so long and so obsessively, or with so little assurance that what I was saying was right, was what I ought to say. I was daunted, too, by the ingratitude of insulting the people who printed my books and were giving me an award. Who was I to spit in the publisher's punch bowl at the annual industry party? Well, I was in fact the one to do it, so I did it. I've never been so nervous before a speech since junior high school commencement. I've never been so surprised by an audience reaction, though the Amazon table sat predictably glumly mute. The viral flurry on the internet and my ensuing 15 Warhol minutes of celebrity status were encouraging. People do care about books. Some of them worry about capitalism. How much good it did in the long run is another question, but at least I ended up feeling that getting what I had to say said right in 6 minutes was entirely worth 6 months of work. This confirms my sense that I have been allowed to use my life well, in work that was worth the time spent on it. Many people might see two principal occupations as incompatible, being a middle-class American intellectual wife, housewife, mother of 3 children, and being a writer. I won't say that doing both jobs at once was easy, but I can report from very late in the life in question that I had found some inevitable conflict, but no incompatibility between the two. Little abnegation was demanded and no sacrifice of life for art or art for life. On the contrary, each nourished and supported the other so deeply that, looking back, they all seem one thing to me. Talks, essays, and occasional pieces. These are really all occasional pieces, addressed on various occasions to various audiences. Their subjects range through animals and books, invented languages, sleep, the house I grew up in, anarchism, how to read a poem, and a poem about a plant. The most useful way to arrange them was chronologically. Many of them were revised slightly for this book. Their original versions can be found in the original publication or on my website. Only 2 of them are overtly political, but as we learn from Robin Morgan and others, the personal and the political are inseparable. A good many of them present a defense, sometimes a fairly belligerent defense, of certain aspects of literature: imaginative, fiction, genre, women's writings, reading as distinct from experiencing media. All through the past 15 years, there's been a steady and increasing shift of critical interest and understanding towards imaginative fiction and away from a rigid view of realism as the only fiction worthy the name of literature. I'm delighted to know that my arguments in defense of genre were becoming unnecessary even as I made them. Gender in literature, however, remains a vexed issue. Books by women continue to be marginalized or segregated, receive fewer major literary awards, and are more subject to terminal inattention following the writer's death. So long as we hear about women's writing, but not about men's writing, because the latter is assumed to be the norm, the balance is not just. The same signal of privilege and prejudice is reflected in the common use of the word feminism and the almost total absence of its natural counterpart, masculinism. I long for the day when neither word is necessary. The Operating Instructions, a talk given at a meeting of Oregon Literary Arts in 2002. A poet has been appointed ambassador. A playwright is elected president. Construction workers stand in line with office managers to buy a new novel. Adults seek moral guidance and intellectual challenge in stories about warrior monkeys, one-eyed giants, and crazy knights who fight windmills. Literacy is considered a beginning, not an end. Well, maybe in some other country, but not this one. In America, the imagination is generally looked on as something that might be useful when the TV is out of order. Poetry and plays have no relation to practical politics. Novels are for students, housewives, and other people who don't work. Fantasy is for children and primitive peoples. Literacy is so you can read the operating instructions. I think the imagination is the single most useful tool mankind possesses. It beats the opposable thumb. I can imagine living without my thumbs, but not without my imagination. I hear voices agreeing with me. Yes, yes, they cry. The creative imagination is a tremendous plus in business. We value creativity. We reward it. In the marketplace, the word creativity has come to mean the generation of ideas applicable to practical strategies to make larger profits. This reduction has gone on so long that the word creative can hardly be degraded further. I don't use it anymore, yielding it to capitalists and academics to abuse as they like, but they can't have imagination. Imagination is not a means of making money. It has no place in the vocabulary of profit making. It is not a weapon, though all weapons originate from it, and their use or non-use depends on it. As with all tools and their uses, the imagination is an essential tool of the mind, a fundamental way of thinking and indispensable means of becoming and remaining human. We have to learn to use it and how to use it, like any other tool. Children have imagination to start with, as they have body, intellect, the capacity for language, things essential to their humanity, things they need to learn how to use well. Such teaching, training, and practice should begin in infancy and go on throughout life. Young human beings need exercise in imagination as they need exercise in all the basic skills of life, bodily and mental. For growth, for health, for competence, for joy. This need continues as long as the mind is alive. When children are taught to hear and learn the central literature of their people or in literate cultures to read and understand it, their imagination is getting a very large part of the exercise it needs. Nothing else does quite as much for most people, not even the other arts. We are a wordy species. Words are the wings both intellect and imagination fly on. Music, dance, visual arts, crafts of all kinds, all are central to human development and well-being. And no art or skill is ever useless learning, but to train the mind to take off from immediate reality and return to it with new understanding and new strength. Nothing quite equals poem and story. Through story, every culture defines itself and teaches its children how to be people and members of their people. Hmong, Kung, Hopi, the Quechua, French, Californian. We are those who arrived at the fourth world. We are Jones Nation. We are the sons of sun. We come from the sea. We are the people who live at the center of the world. A people that doesn't live at the center of the world, as defined and described by poets and storytellers, is in a bad way. The center of the world is where you live fully, where you know how things are done rightly, done well. A child who doesn't know where the center is, where home is, what home is, that child is in a very bad way. Home isn't mom and dad and sis and bud. Home isn't where they have to let you in. It's not a place at all. Home is imaginary. Home, imagine, comes to be. It is real. Realer than any other place. But you can't get to it unless your people show you how to imagine it. Whoever your people are, they may not be your relatives. They may never have spoken your language. They may have been dead for 1,000 years. They may be nothing but words printed on paper. Ghosts of voices, shadows of minds, but they can guide you home. They are your human community. All of us have to learn how to invent our lives, make them up, imagine them. We need to be taught these skills. We need guides to show us how. Without them, our lives get made up for us by other people. Human beings have always joined in groups to imagine how best to live and help one another carry out the plan. The essential function of human community is to arrive at some agreement on what we need, what life ought to be, what we want our children to learn, and then collaborate in learning and teaching so that we and they can go on the way we think is the right way. Small communities with strong traditions are often clear about the way they want to go and good at teaching it. But tradition may crystallize imagination to the point of fossilizing it as a dogma and forbidding new ideas. Larger communities, such as cities, open up room for people to imagine alternatives, learn from people of different traditions, and invent their own ways to live. As alternatives proliferate, however, those who take the responsibility of teaching find little social and moral consensus on what they should be teaching. What we need, what life ought to be, in our time of huge populations exposed continuously to reproduce voices, images, and words used for commercial and political profit. There are too many people who want to and can invent us, own us, shape and control us through seductive and powerful media. It's a lot to ask a child to find a way through all that alone. Nobody can do anything very much, really, alone. What a child needs, what we all need, is to find some other people who have imagined life along lines that make sense to us and allow some freedom, and listen to them. Not hear passively, but listen. Listening is an act of community, which takes space, time, and silence. Reading is a means of listening. Reading is not as passive as hearing or viewing. It's an act. You do it. You read at your pace, your own speed, not the ceaseless, incoherent gabbling, shouting rush of the media. You take in what you can and what to take in, not what they shove at you fast and hard and loud in order to overwhelm and control you. Reading a story, you may be told something, but you're not being sold anything. And though you're usually alone when you read, you are in communion with another mind. You aren't being brainwashed or co-opted or used. You've joined in an act of the imagination. I know no reason why our media could not create a similar community of the imagination, as theater has often done in societies of the past, but they're mostly not doing it. They are so controlled by advertising and profiteering that the best people who work in them, the real artists, if they resist the pressure to sell out, get drowned out by the endless rush for novelty, by the greed of entrepreneurs. Much of literature remains free of such co-optation, in part because a lot of the books were written by dead people, who by definition are not greedy. And many living poets and novelists, though their publishers may be crawling abjectly after bestsellers, continue to be motivated less by the desire for gain than by the wish to do what they'd probably do for nothing if they could afford it. That is, practice their art. Make something well. Get something right. Literature remains comparatively and amazingly honest and reliable.